The sun rose gently over the village of Oriare, bathing the fields in gold and heralding another day of toil and hope. Among the early risers was a boy named Ovie, whose hands, though calloused from tending the family farm, still clung to dreams far greater than the horizon. At 12 years old, Ovie was no ordinary child. Born with a spirit that matched the soaring eagles, he had learned early the weight of hardship. His father's voice, once warm with stories of ancient heroes, was now a fading memory, and in his place stood Aretta, his stepmother, who saw Ovie not as a boy to be nurtured, but as a burden to her plans. I remember that night clearly. It was the night the big storm came, and along with the heavy rain, I could hear Ovie crying. Standing outside his father's house, soaking wet and shaking from the cold. His stepmother, Aretta, was yelling at him from the doorway. "You think you can take what belongs to my daughters? You're nothing but trouble!" she shouted before slamming the door, leaving him out in the rain. I watched from our house next door, peeking through a small gap in the wall. Ovie was my friend. He lost his mom when he was very little, and his dad, Obasi, remarried a woman named Aretta. She had 3 daughters, Adaobi, Ifu, and Ama. From the moment Aretta moved in, she didn't like Ovie. She treated him differently, giving him the hardest chores and the least food, while her daughters got the best of everything. Ovie's dad was kind, but he was always working in the fields, so he didn't see how badly Aretta treated Ovie. One night, things got worse. Aretta accused Ovie of stealing bread, even though he didn't do it. She used it as a reason to throw him out of the house. "Leave! Go to your uncle in the next village!" she shouted. Ovie had no choice. He left, walking into the storm. I wanted to help him, to call him over to our house, but I was too scared. What if Aretta got angry at my family too? Ovie walked to his uncle's house. His uncle welcomed him warmly and took care of him. Ovie worked hard, learning how to weave and sell cloth at the market. Even though life was tough, he didn't give up. Back in our village, Aretta's daughters grew up, and they were kind, not like their mother. Sometimes we would hear news about Ovie. He was doing well, much better than anyone expected. He got married to a woman named Afi, and they had 2 children. He became known not just for his weaving, but for being a good and honest man. Years passed, and one day, Ovie came back to the village. His father was old and very sick, and Ovie wanted to see him. He arrived in a nice cart, wearing fine clothes, with his wife and children beside him. Everyone in the village came out to see the boy, who left with nothing, but returned as a successful man. Aretta stood at her door, looking pale. She knew she had done wrong. As Ovie approached, she knelt down and began to cry. "Ovie, I'm sorry. I was wrong," she said, her voice shaking. The whole village watched in silence. Ovie stood tall, looking at her with a mix of sadness and kindness. "You hurt me, Aretta," he said softly. "But I've learned that forgiveness is the only way to move on. I forgive you." Aretta cried, and her daughters, now grown, stood behind her, looking sad and sorry. They had seen how their mother's actions had hurt Ovie, and wished they could make things right. I remember that day Ovie came back from his uncle's village. The sky was clear, the sun was bright, and everyone gathered to welcome him. But something felt different, not as joyful as it should have been. I could hear whispers in the crowd. The villagers were saying things about Ovie selling his father's land. At first, I didn't believe it. Ovie loved that land, and I knew he would never do something like that. But the rumors kept growing, and I started to wonder what was really happening. Ovie didn't seem happy either. He went to talk to the village elders and asked them what people were saying about him. Uncle Ize, one of the elders, looked sad. "Ovie, there are papers," he said. holding up some documents. It says here that you signed your land over to Aretta. Is it true? Ovie was shocked. No, that's not true. I never signed anything, he said loudly, his hands shaking. He rushed home to confront Aretta. When he entered the house, Aretta was sitting in the corner, pretending to sew. Her daughters were there too, looking uneasy. Aretta, Ovie's voice was firm. What have you done? Why are there papers saying I gave you my father's land? Aretta looked up, acting surprised. Ovie, I don't know what you're talking about. The villagers must be mistaken. But her voice trembled, and everyone could tell she wasn't being honest. Afi, Ovie's wife, stepped forward. Aretta, we have done nothing but show you kindness. Why would you betray us like this? Aretta's daughters, especially Adaobi, looked uncomfortable. Mama, is it true? Did you do this? Adaobi asked softly, but Aretta didn't answer. She turned away, her face hardening. That evening, Ovie and Afi started gathering evidence. They spoke to people who had seen Aretta meeting secretly with a man who claimed to know about the forged papers. They talked to the scribe who'd written the false documents. Days later, the village elders called a big meeting. Everyone gathered under the large baobab tree in the center of the village. Aretta came too, her face pale. Her daughters sat behind her, looking nervous. Ovie stood up, holding the fake documents in his hand. These papers say, I gave my father's land to Aretta, but I didn't. These are fake. His voice was steady, but you could hear the hurt in it. The elders passed the documents around. One of them, a wise old man named Elder Kofi, spoke up. Ovie is right. These are forgeries. Someone has tried to trick us. The villagers started murmuring. People who had been angry with Ovie began to look at Aretta with suspicion. Is it true, Aretta? Did you do this? Elder Kofi asked. Aretta tried to deny it, but the truth was clear. The scribe admitted that she had paid him to create the documents. Tears streamed down her face as the villagers looked at her with disappointment. Ovie looked at Aretta, his expression a mix of sadness and anger. You wanted to take everything from me, he said quietly. But I'm not like you. I won't punish you the way you hurt me. Aretta dropped her head, unable to meet his eyes. The elders decided that the land would stay with Ovie, as it should have. Aretta was allowed to stay in the house, but the villagers no longer trusted her. Even after all this, Ovie didn't let anger take over. He worked hard to rebuild the trust of the villagers and continued helping those in need. But he knew one thing. This wasn't the end of the story. Aretta's actions had left a wound that would take time to heal, and there was still much to do to make things right. One bright morning, just as the roosters finished crowing, a sleek horse-drawn carriage rolled into the village. The villagers gathered to see who the important visitor was. A tall man with a fine coat and polished shoes stepped out. His name was Edosio, and he looked like someone who had plenty of wealth and clever ideas. He walked up to Ovie's house, a warm smile on his face. You must be Ovie, he said, extending his hand. I've heard so much about you. Your work as a weaver is well known even in my village. Ovie shook his hand politely. Thank you, sir. How can I help you? Edosio explained that he was a businessman from a distant town. He said he wanted to work with Ovie to sell woven cloth on a much larger scale. Together, we can make your business grow. You'll be famous all across the land, he said, his eyes sparkling. At first, Ovie was cautious. He didn't know Edosio and wasn't sure if he could trust him. Afi also seemed unsure and whispered to Ovie, we should think carefully before saying yes. But before Ovie could respond, Aretta chimed in. You should take this opportunity, Ovie, Aretta said. her voice unusually sweet. "A smart man like you can handle this kind of business." She smiled, but her eyes flickered with something Ovie couldn't quite place. Unbeknownst to Ovie, Aretta and Edosio had already spoken. Weeks before, when Edosio had passed through the village, Aretta had secretly approached him. "If you help me take what Ovie has, I'll make sure you get a share of his wealth," she had whispered. They had come up with a plan to trick Ovie into signing an agreement that would give Edosio control over everything Ovie owned. Ovie, wanting to provide more for his family, and trusting that Edosio was sincere, eventually agreed to the partnership. Papers were drawn up, and Edosio explained them quickly. "This is just a standard agreement," Edosio said with a reassuring smile. "It will make everything official." Aretta stood nearby, nodding with approval. "Go on, Ovie, sign it," she urged. Afi's brows furrowed in worry. "Are you sure about this, Ovie?" she asked. But Ovie, wanting to believe that this was an opportunity to expand his work and provide for the village, signed the documents without realizing they were part of a trap. For a while, everything seemed fine. Edosio began shipping Ovie's woven cloth to other villages, and they made good money. But strange things started happening. Edosio began making decisions without consulting Ovie, selling the cloth at lower prices and keeping most of the profits. Soon, Ovie found himself struggling to pay his workers and maintain the business. One day, a messenger brought a letter from the town where Edosio was based. The letter claimed that the business and even Ovie's house now belonged to Edosio. Ovie was stunned. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice shaking. Afi looked at the papers they had signed. "Ovie," she said softly, her voice filled with worry. "These documents, they gave Edosio full control of everything." The realization hit Ovie like a storm. He had been tricked, and his own stepmother was part of the betrayal. When Ovie confronted Aretta, she didn't deny it. "You shouldn't have had everything," she snapped, her voice cold. "It should belong to my daughters." Ovie felt a deep ache in his heart. Even after he forgave her for everything she had done before, Aretta had found a way to hurt him again. "I trusted you," Ovie said quietly, tears in his eyes. "And you've only shown me cruelty in return." But Ovie was not one to give up. He turned to Afi, who stood by his side as always. "We will fight this," he said firmly. "We will not let them take away everything we've worked for." Ovie and Afi began gathering evidence again, this time to prove Edosio's betrayal and Aretta's involvement. They sought help from the village elders and even traveled to neighboring villages to find witnesses who could testify against Edosio. The fight ahead would be long and difficult, but Ovie was determined. He had faced storms before and survived, and he knew that with Afi's strength and support, he could overcome this one too. But deep inside, Ovie wondered, how far would Aretta go to see him fall? Her cheeks. "It's true," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I helped Edosio, I could protect what I thought belonged to my daughters. But I was wrong." The villagers gasped, and Adaobi, the eldest daughter, stepped forward. "Mother, you've done enough harm. We don't need wealth if it comes from hurting Otovi," and Afi wasted no time. The next morning, they went to speak with Elder Kofi and a few of the other elders who had always been fair and wise. They explained what had happened, showing the documents Edosio had tricked Ovie into signing. Elder Kofi frowned as he examined the papers. "These agreements look legitimate, but it's clear that you were deceived, Ovie," he said, stroking his beard. "If what you say is true, we must expose Edosio and his lies." The elders agreed to help. A meeting was called under the baobab tree, and the entire village gathered to hear what had transpired. When Ovie stood up to speak, His voice was steady, but there was pain in his eyes. "Friends, I trusted Edosio," he began, holding up the documents. "I thought he was offering me an opportunity to grow my business and help our village. But I was wrong. He has taken everything from me. My business, my home, and the land my father left behind." The crowd murmured in shock. Many of them had seen Edosio's charming smile and thought he was a good man. Now, they felt betrayed as well. Aretta, standing at the back with her daughters, shifted uncomfortably. She knew the truth would come out soon, and her plan was crumbling. Afi stood beside Ovie, her voice strong and clear. "This is not just about us losing everything. It's about trust. Edosio and Aretta's actions show that greed and lies can tear apart a family and a village. We must stand together to make things right." Ovie knew that words alone would not win this battle. He needed proof of Edosio's betrayal and Aretta's involvement. So, he and Afi set out to find it. They traveled to Edosio's town, speaking with workers at his warehouse and shop. One of them, a young clerk, whispered to Ovie, "I saw Edosio meeting with a woman before he came to your village. She gave him money to help with some kind of plan. I don't know her name, but she was wearing a dark green scarf." Ovie's heart sank. He knew who the clerk was describing, Aretta. Meanwhile, Afi spoke to the scribe who had written the false contracts. At first, he denied everything. But when Afi promised to speak with the town chief if he didn't tell the truth, the scribe confessed. "It's true," he admitted. "Edosio paid me extra to change the wording on the documents. I didn't know it would ruin your life. I'm sorry." Ovie and Afi collected all the evidence they could. By the time they returned to their village, they had letters, testimonies, and witnesses ready to expose the truth. The elders called a second meeting under the baobab tree, inviting Edosio to attend. Ovie and Afi were ready, and the villagers, still shaken by the first meeting, were eager to hear what would happen next. Edosio arrived with his confident smile, but it faltered when he saw the serious faces of the elders and the stack of papers in Ovie's hands. "Ovie," Edosio began, his tone smooth. "Surely we can resolve this matter peacefully. Business is complicated and misunderstandings happen." But Elder Kofi raised a hand, silencing him. "This is not a misunderstanding, Edosio. This is betrayal." Ovie stepped forward, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "You and Aretta planned this from the beginning. You tricked me into signing those papers so you could take what my father worked for. But the truth always comes out, Edosio." One by one, Ovie and Afi presented their evidence. The scribe's confession, the testimonies from workers in Edosio's town, and even a written account from the clerk who saw Aretta meeting with Edosio. The villagers murmured in anger, realizing they had been deceived. Aretta, standing off to the side, tried to slip away quietly, but Elder Kofi called her forward. "Aretta," he said, his voice firm, "is what Ovie says true? Did you help Edosio betray your own stepson?" Aretta's face crumpled. She knelt in the dirt, tears streaming down hers. She said, her voice shaking but firm. Ovie looked at Aretta, his heart heavy. "I forgave you once, Aretta. You betrayed me again. This time, forgiveness won't come so easily." The elders decided that Edosio would be stripped of all his claims to Ovie's property. They demanded he repay what he had stolen and banned him from the village. As for Aretta, the villagers turned their backs on her, shunning her for her actions. She and her daughters stayed in the house, but they lived quietly, avoided by the people they had once called neighbors. Though justice was served, Ovie knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. His business was in ruins, and his trust in others had been shaken. But with Afi by his side and the support of the villagers, who now stood firmly with him, Ovie began to rebuild once more. He had learned that even in the face of betrayal and hardship, hope could still grow, as long as he didn't give up. Months turned into years, and Ovie's determination and hard work bore fruit once again. With the villagers' support, he rebuilt his weaving business better than before. Afi stood by his side, helping him manage the work and care for their growing children. Word of Ovie's talent spread far and wide. He began receiving orders from towns and cities beyond the neighboring villages. Merchants would travel long distances just to buy his finely woven cloth. One merchant was so impressed with the quality of Ovie's work that he introduced him to a wealthy trader from the city. The trader made Ovie an incredible offer. "If you supply cloth for my stores, I will ensure your business grows beyond what you could imagine," he said. Ovie accepted, and before long, he was not only selling cloth but also teaching others the art of weaving. He became known as the kind-hearted businessman who offered fair wages and opportunities to anyone willing to work hard. Ovie and Afi moved to a larger house in the heart of the village, surrounded by farmland and workshops where many people worked for him. His children grew up helping in the business, learning the value of honesty and perseverance from their parents. Despite his wealth, Ovie remained humble. He donated to the village, built a school for children, and provided resources to help farmers and traders. The village flourished because of his generosity, and everyone admired him. One sunny afternoon, as Ovie and Afi were overseeing work at the workshops, Adaobi, Aretta's eldest daughter, arrived. She looked nervous, but determined. "Brother Ovie," he began, bowing her head, "Mother wishes to see you. She's not well, and she wants to speak to you before it's too late." Ovie's face grew serious. He hadn't seen or spoken to Aretta in years. After her betrayal, she and her daughters lived a quiet life, away from the rest of the village. He glanced at Afi, who nodded gently, silently encouraging him. "I'll come," Ovie said simply. When he arrived at the small rundown house where Aretta lived, he found her lying on a cot, her face pale and tired. Her daughters stood around her, tears in their eyes. When she saw Ovie, her face crumpled with guilt and regret. "Ovie," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've hurt you more than anyone ever should. But before I leave this world, I need you to know I'm sorry, truly sorry." Ovie looked at her for a long moment, his heart heavy with memories of the pain she had caused him. But as he stood there, he thought about the life he had built, the love, the respect, the happiness. Forgiveness had always been his strength, and he realized that holding on to anger would only dim the light he had worked so hard to create. He knelt beside Aretta and took her hand gently. "I forgive you, Aretta," he said softly. "What's done is done. Let's leave the pain of the past behind and move forward in peace." Aretta wept, her tears soaking Ovie's hand. Adaobi and her sisters cried too, overwhelmed by Ovie's kindness. After Aretta's passing, Ovie and Afi made sure her daughters were cared for. Adaobi, Ifu, and Ama were given roles in the business, and they worked hard, becoming a part of the flourishing life of the village. The villagers, inspired by Ovie's forgiveness and generosity, grew closer as a community. The school Ovie had built became a place of learning and friendship. His weaving workshops brought prosperity to everyone, and the once small village became known as a place where honesty, hard work, and kindness could transform lives. As the years went by, Ovie became a beloved elder in the village. Sitting under the shade of the mango tree with his grandchildren gathered around him, he would tell them stories about his journey. "Life will test you," he would say, his voice calm and wise. But no matter what happens, always hold on to kindness and forgiveness. They will lead you to true happiness. Ovie's story became a lesson for generations. His legacy was not just his wealth, but the love and unity he brought to the village. And as the sun set on Ovie's remarkable life, it was clear that he had built something far greater than riches. He had built a future filled with hope and happiness for everyone around him. The end. Please, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. If you enjoyed this tale of Ovie's journey from tears to triumph, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more legendary stories from African folklore. Your support helps keep these incredible tales alive. Hit the like button if you love a good mystery. Share this story with friends and family who enjoy ancient legends. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another epic tale. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, and I can't wait to share them with you. Let me know in the comments which African folktale you want to hear next. Thanks for being part of this journey. Your support means everything.